This is a massive beaver weighing at least 50 kilograms, akin to the Shaquille O'Neal of beavers. It's the largest Tom has ever caught in his career, exciting him greatly. Here in Montana's Bison Valley, Tom and Nancy rely on each other. After a kiss goodbye to his wife, Tom heads out to work. This year's fur trade is booming. Although his apprentice Sean continuously provides game, the active Tom can't sit still. He checks the trap lines near his home daily, a routine since moving here in 1977. In a few weeks, Tom will turn 80. Age may wear on the body, but not his spirit. As long as he breathes, he won't stop enjoying life. Soon he arrives at a pond surrounded by numerous willows and poplars, the beaver's food source, leading to their rapid reproduction. Most of Tom's beavers come from here. The pond is large, but beaver activity is easy to spot by the dams they build. Tom's traps are set near these dams. At the first trap, he finds it empty and moves on. At the next spot, Tom chuckles as he sees a beaver caught in the trap. Catching a beaver always brings joy, even to an octogenarian. This beaver is unusually fat, likely the family leader. Tom resets the trap, hoping for continued luck. He adds a homemade sauce made from beaver glands to attract more, emitting a scent unfamiliar to the beaver family. With leadership likely contested among them, the appearance of a stranger's scent will surely draw them to investigate. Tom laboriously lifts the beaver onto his sled and continues his rounds. Besides beaver traps, he has set others, like the ground box traps for weasels, common in the valley during winter. Unfortunately, these are empty today. He set up 10 traps and caught only one prey, but Tom was satisfied. Not every day brings a catch, and many hunters return empty-handed. Tom enjoys the process, not the quantity of game. With no mortgage stress, he loaded the beaver into his truck and headed home happily. In his workshop, he quickly placed the beaver on the workbench to skin it before the organs decayed, avoiding bacterial damage to the fur. Before starting, he warmed up the room. An adult beaver typically sells for about $300, but this large one could fetch nearly double. From its tail alone, Tom could make 2 sheaths. Beaver skin is close to fat, making cutting tricky even for an experienced hunter like Tom. Taking no chances, he carefully skinned the beaver, then applied a bag of salt to the skin to kill bacteria and dry it out. After a busy day, Tom was hungry and ready for dinner. Thousands of miles away in South Carolina, it's spring. Near the ocean, dense maritime forests line the shore. Eustace, far from home, is vacationing at his old friend Jess's place. Today, Jess got a part-time job to repair a dock and brought experienced Eustace along. They arrived at a dock used by shrimp boats, but it was tilting due to age and seawater erosion. Craig, the dock manager, was troubled. After hearing Craig's story, they inspected the dock and found the situation grim. Fortunately, they had a secret weapon capable of completing the task, a sawmill they had recently acquired. After parting with Craig, the two headed into the forest to select the right timber and planned the direction for the tree to fall. Once sure, Eustace started the chainsaw and cut halfway through a small tree next to it. Jess then used a forklift to push the tree down, a method both efficient and safe. With their teamwork, they brought down the large tree, which Eustace then split in the middle. Jess hauled the logs to the sawmill, secured them, and started the machine to trim the edges, keeping only the solid core for beams. Each log yielded 2 thick planks. They flipped the logs to continue cutting the other half. Soon, they had gathered enough materials and were ready to head to the dock. Eustace planned to reinforce the sinking dock by first lifting it. Using a winch, they raised the collapsed section by 8 inches to level it. They drilled holes at the junctions of the posts and beams and inserted a corrosion-resistant stainless steel bar, securing it with bolts and chains to keep the original beams and posts tightly connected. However, this was not enough to support the deck. They then used the heavy planks they prepared, again using the winch to place them slightly below the deck at a vertical angle to the posts, drilling holes and securing them with stainless steel to fix the beams between 2 posts, strengthening the dock's structure. Eustace was pleased to see his friend complete the repair, indicating his sawmill could be profitable. Meanwhile, a beautiful rabbit had fallen into a hunter's trap and was about to become a tasty dinner. Life here is simple, reliant on nature for food. This is in northern Canada, near Illiguk Lake, a remote location. Alan and Jenny live by the lake, where a 2-day blizzard had caused significant damage to the forest. With the weather clearing, Alan set out to check the only road into town, ensuring it was clear for any emergencies. The road stretched 20 miles across the lake to a logging road leading to town. Due to lack of use, it was covered in snow. Alan had a bad feeling, and soon enough, his snowmobile was stuck in a snow pit. He tried to free it by rocking it back and forth, but the heavy vehicle just swayed in place. With no other option, he turned off the engine and started shoveling snow from under the skis. After every heavy snowfall, he performs these tasks, but today's difficulties came early. He hadn't even gone a mile before he had to clear the snow. Afterward, he pulled out a cable and tied it to a nearby tree. Then, he restarted the engine and slowly pulled the snowmobile out of the pit using the winch. He continued onward. Meanwhile, his wife had her own tasks. She went hunting nearby to gather some fresh meat, knowing her husband would expend a lot of energy today. A tender, delicious rabbit was her first choice. Soon, she found a rabbit trail. Rabbits have many predators, needing to avoid owls from above and lynxes and foxes from the ground, so they are usually active in areas with dense brush. This is where she set her traps. The noose trap she used was simple and effective. Once it ensnared the rabbit's head, the more it struggled, the tighter the bind became. Jenny tied the wire to a small tree, setting the trap about 8 centimeters above the ground, directly above the rabbit trail. To better guide the rabbit, Jenny collected some branches and planted them on the ground to create a path. She then hung a pink ribbon on a tree to mark the location of the trap. Now she had to set up other traps. On the other side, Alan had advanced 7 miles with 13 more to go. In addition to the heavy snow, other obstacles included fallen trees blocking the path. Alan sighed, took out his chainsaw, and began to cut the large tree. The tree was heavy, and he had to cut it into several pieces to move it easily. After clearing the obstacle, he continued his journey. Meanwhile, Jenny was still setting traps when she spotted a ribbon from a trap she had set the day before. She went to check it, and was surprised to find a snowshoe hare caught in the trap, frozen solid. As daylight faded, Alan was nearing the end of clearing the path. He was just a mile away from reaching the logging road when he encountered his final difficulty. A complex tangle of more than a dozen trees blocking the road completely. Alan felt a deep sense of helplessness, but had no choice but to persevere. After some time, he finally cleared the path, exhausted but relieved as he faced no further incidents and successfully reached the logging road. The road to town was open again, and he could now head home. However, there's never a dull moment in a mountain man's life. A new day means new tasks. Today, the couple planned to add materials to their roof. 7 years ago, they bought this abandoned homestead with 12 cabins needing renovation. So far, they've only completed 3. Ideally, such work should be done in summer, but summer is their busiest season as anglers from across the country come to fish at the lake. They provide services to earn money, so roof repairs must wait until winter. Alan started the sawmill to collect some planks for the roof rafters, using logs from their yard that were cut down due to safety concerns. Now, they could be repurposed. First, they needed to dismantle the old roof. Alan took a forceful approach, wildly cutting with a chainsaw. But this backfired when the roof collapsed, causing Jenny to scream in fright. Fortunately, Alan was only scraped, but the scare was enough to shake him. On the other side of the roof, he chose to cut from the top. However, 3 years ago, he fell from the greenhouse roof and broke 6 bones, leaving him with some psychological scars. He proceeded cautiously, slowly dismantling the eaves. Now ready for the next step, he placed the wooden planks on the roof, measured their size, and trimmed them to fit. Before installing the planks, he needed to add a crossbeam. Working in perfect harmony, the two laid the heavy beam across the roof and secured it by angling 2 rafters on top, ensuring the beam would not fall. After a busy period, they constructed a grid-like wooden frame using the planks. The next step was to install tin sheets, which are lightweight and offer good waterproofing while also absorbing some sunlight to keep the interior warm. Alan nailed them one by one to the frame. When it was time to secure the last sheet, Jenny tied a rope around a piece of wood and threw the other end to Alan, allowing him to hold onto the rope and prevent slipping off the roof. Under his wife's anxious gaze, Alan successfully drove in the last screws. He could now come down, but the work wasn't finished. He still had to install a critical component, the ridge cap, which provides waterproofing. Unexpectedly, the calm day turned windy. Alan felt shaky on the roof, causing Jenny distress as she feared an accident might occur. Fortunately, Alan was careful and successfully installed the ridge cap, safely descending afterward. The couple embraced, reflecting on the hardships of life, then slowly walked back to the house under the sunset. Life is tough, but they love their work and enjoy the happiness that a free life brings. Men's happiness is simple. They tirelessly build a small boat just to fish in the river. This is in Idaho's Sawtooth Mountains, where Harry and Kid run a ranch. Today, Kid mysteriously brought out a magazine featuring his wife's great-grandparents, who were nobles and formed a small fleet to conquer the wilderness. The river that crosses the Sawtooth Mountains, named the Salmon River, is popular for winter salmon spawning. They wanted to go fishing, and the magazine detailed the boat's specifications. As a skilled boat builder, Kid was fully capable of replicating such a boat. The two set to work immediately, marking dimensions on the boards before cutting them. Next, they needed to glue 2 plywood sheets together using high-quality epoxy resin applied along the edges of both. They pressed the boards tightly together, covered them with wax paper, and placed heavy objects on top to ensure a strong bond. Once the resin dried, the boards were perfectly joined. Then, they started making ribs for the boat. Due to the boat's unique shape, each rib needed to be cut to specific lengths and angles. After ensuring the measurements were correct, Kid first used silicone adhesive, then secured the ribs with screws. By this time, the plywood's bonding was nearly complete. They checked the results and were remarkably pleased. Next, they drew a straight line down the middle of the board and cut along it, preparing to use it as the side of the boat's hull. They aligned the 2 ends and used a piece of wood to hold them together before installing the ribs. The shape of the boat's hull began to take form. As they progressed, they installed other components. As time passed, the construction of the drift boat neared completion. They trimmed off any excess wood and smoothed the rough edges. Then, they moved on to the next step. To prevent falling out during a struggle with a fish, they added a support point to the boat. Afterward, they flipped the boat over to waterproof the bottom. They used epoxy resin again, this time mixing in some graphite powder to make the bottom black and more slick. Soon, they had applied a shiny coat to the boat's bottom and waited for it to dry naturally. A few hours later, they returned to the workshop. The boat's bottom was dry. They flipped the boat back over, added seats, and brought 2 wooden paddles, inserting them into the corresponding metal rings. At this moment, the drift boat was finally completed. They dragged the boat to the riverbank, ready to test its performance. Sitting in the boat, they found it easy to maneuver and were ready to go fishing. The next day, they prepared various supplies and chose to go downstream, embarking on an exciting and adventurous journey. A doe on the bank curiously watched them, unafraid and intrigued by their presence. After passing a smooth section of the river, the boat entered rapid waters. They put on life jackets, ready for a real challenge. But the rapids were more turbulent than expected, causing the boat to shake wildly and risk capsizing while the spray hit their faces with a chilling thrill. Excited, they shouted with joy, forgetting all their troubles. Once they navigated through the dangerous stretch, the river calmed again, and their spirits settled slightly. Unsure of the salmon migration progress, they decided to manually check. Harry took out his fishing rod and began to try fishing. Unfortunately, after drifting for a while without any fish biting, they encountered another set of rapids that seemed perilous. They docked the boat at the shore to observe first. Kid assessed the route in his mind. While risky, it was still within his control. They set off again, and it was now Kid's turn to showcase his skills. First, he turned the boat sideways to slow it down. As they entered the rapids, he promptly straightened the boat. Around the bends, he adjusted its direction again. With over a decade of boating experience, Kid expertly navigated the small boat, as if it were a leaf floating with the current, yet perfectly controlling its direction to avoid collisions with rocks. Under his skilled handling, the boat seemed to come alive, always dodging dangers at unbelievable angles. His professional performance earned praise from his brother, and even left a small bird astounded. After drifting safely for a while, they encountered another challenge. A mountain on the riverbank cast a long shadow, causing the river to freeze in that area. They chose to go ashore and drag the boat forward, step by step. Once past this section, they reboarded and continued drifting downstream. Fortunately, the rest of the journey went smoothly. Harry took out his fishing rod again, waiting for a bite. Besides salmon, the river also housed native rainbow trout, known as the ghosts of the river due to their elusiveness. However, this time they were prepared with tasty bait favored by big fish, which, combined with their professional rods, promised immediate results. Indeed, they soon had a fish on the line. Harry quickly reeled in while Kid used a net to catch what turned out to be their first salmon of the day. It hadn't spawned yet. Post-spawning fish, known as zombie fish, are inedible. It seemed the salmon run had reached their spot. Suddenly, both rods reacted at the same time. Each caught a fish, and it was just the beginning. One after another, fish were hooked. Knowing the principle of not overfishing, they planned to catch only 10 fish in total. Once satisfied, they would head home. Meanwhile, in Montana's Salish Mountains, a hunter's paradise with abundant wildlife, Paul was busy with his traps, taking advantage of spring's approach and the melting ice. It was an excellent time to trap otters, which follow the water currents to find mates. However, a deadly trap awaited them. Back home, Paul started processing his recent catch, which included a wolf. Wolves are cunning and difficult to trap, but their pelts are valuable, easily selling for $500. The wolf he caught would fetch an even higher price because a customer wanted a taxidermy specimen. This required meticulous skinning without errors, justifying a higher price. Although this was a tedious and dull task, Paul was deep in thought while working. So far, his efforts were substantial enough to change his life, as he had nearly saved enough for a down payment to buy a homestead. It didn't take long for him to skin the wolf pelt. After a careful inspection to ensure there were no flaws, he was ready to dry it. He placed the wolf pelt in a rotating machine to buff it using processed corn cobs, which function like a comb to remove impurities from the fur. This season, Paul also caught 16 coyotes. The value of coyote fur is somewhat lower, totaling about $1,200 for the lot. Additionally, he trapped many beavers, tallying 9 high-quality pelts. Next, he took out a pile of fur. These were muskrat pelts, and he had caught 65 muskrats this season. Although their value isn't high, sometimes quantity is key. He also had 6 mink pelts and a few otter and badger furs. Due to their scarcity, these furs were in demand. Paul summed up his 3-month haul, which surprisingly could bring in around $20,000. Now, he needed to pack up these furs and send them to the tannery to be converted into real cash. The next day, with money in his pocket, Paul took his son to fulfill a lifelong dream. Up a small path into the mountains, there was a vacant plot where he had bought land. He shared his plans with his son. Once the snow and ice melted, they could start building. Both were very excited about this prospect. This was why Paul worked so hard. Thinking about passing assets onto future generations filled him with overwhelming emotion. In the north, at Lake Iliamna, it would be a few more weeks before the ice melted. Jenny was collecting water through a hole in the ice. Lacking a water system, they had to rely on raw lake water. She carried 2 buckets of water to the greenhouse, preparing to cultivate some vegetables. Meanwhile, Alan was preparing to repair a water supply system. He wanted to channel lake water into the greenhouse to ease his wife's burden. Although unfamiliar with water systems, fortunately, there was existing equipment on the homestead, albeit 7 years old. First, Alan needed to reinforce the wooden frame. Next, he checked the pipes stretching to the lake, looking for any damage. Indeed, he found a section of the pipe had broken, likely due to a snowmobile passing over. Alan gathered some tools to flatten the broken edges and fit a coupling. While he was busy with the repair, his wife Jenny was preparing the soil in the greenhouse. The area, being volcanic, had soil unsuitable for vegetable cultivation outside. However, the greenhouse soil, which they mixed themselves, contained minerals like calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, enriched with chicken manure. They had also purchased peat moss to help retain moisture and added crushed eggshells for extra calcium. Jenny, who loves tomatoes, decided to plant them first. She started the stove to provide continuous heat to the greenhouse. Meanwhile, Alan finished fixing the pipe and was ready to test the pump. He took a water pump capable of pushing water 25 meters to the lakeside. Before pumping, he added some hot water to the pipe to ensure it wasn't frozen. After feeling confident, he started the pump, but after a while, it failed to draw water, indicating the pipe might still be frozen below. On the other hand, Jenny thought of using wood ash, an excellent material for enriching soil nutrients. Eager for delicious tomatoes, she had also added other residues like partridge and rabbit bones, which had been thrown into the fire pit throughout the winter. She believed these ashes would provide rich nutrients. At the greenhouse door, Jenny remembered another type of fertilizer she had collected that looked like chocolate beans, moose droppings. She added these to the soil for a secondary upgrade. Now everything was ready except for the fresh water, which depended on her husband's efforts. Alan started the chainsaw and cut into the ice. He removed the ice blocks, allowing lake water to fill the gap. He then inserted the water pipe and started the water pump. This time, water flowed clearly. Alan connected the pipes and followed the flow to check for leaks. Reaching the wooden frame, he saw the water tank was full and water was starting to overflow. Now, he could channel the water into the greenhouse. Alan connected the water pipe to an outlet and turned on the switch. Jenny waited a moment, and finally, water came out. They were thrilled, feeling one step closer to a happier life. They embraced, encouraging each other, then went home to enjoy dinner. The process of making fish oil was visually pleasing. First, the fish meat was cut off, and the skin was thrown into a pot. Some water was added, and it was simmered on low heat for several hours to produce a yellow liquid, precious fish oil. This is in the northern Washington Kettle Range. Ray Livingston, a full-time hunter, was excited about spring's arrival, bringing life and rapidly rising river levels, prime fishing time. Each spring, he fished for whitefish in the lake, a vital food source, and made fish oil from them. The oil was primarily used to make a hunting lure spray, crucial for attracting game. Whitefish, a large freshwater species, can weigh up to 20 kilograms. Ray aimed to catch about 10 of these fish. Soon, he reached his destination and opened his tackle box, filled with various fishing parts. Because whitefish are predatory, his bait was a small fish-like model with a hook on its back. Ray then hung a small insect on the hook, completing the lure. Now, he could start fishing. Ray moved the rod up and down, giving the lure a swimming motion. The method was effective, and soon, a fish bit. Ray quickly reeled in, but the fish put up a strong fight. After a tug of war, Ray emerged victorious, pulling a freshwater cod to the surface. Although it wasn't a whitefish, Ray still smiled triumphantly, holding his catch. This was just the beginning for him. He wanted to strike while the iron was hot. Today, the lake was calm with a few wild ducks swimming by, a sign of good things to come. Sure enough, after a while, another fish bit the bait. The fishing rod bent into an exaggerated angle as Ray rhythmically pulled the line, gradually bringing the fish aboard. It was a whitefish, Ray's first target of the day, and this catch seemed to open the door to his luck. Soon, a second fish struck, and Ray seized the opportunity, growing more vigorous with each catch. He was so delighted that he couldn't resist giving the fish a kiss. At this rate, he would quickly complete his task. As thunder rolled, sudden spring rain began to fall. Fortunately, Ray had already met his goal and returned home just in time. But there was no time to rest. He needed to extract the fish oil while the fish were fresh. He started by cutting near the fish gills, chopping in, then slicing horizontally to split the fish in two. He cut the meat off the skin to enjoy as sashimi, and the rest went into the pot. Following the same process, he kept the meat and put all the skins in the pot, adding just enough water to cover them. He then placed the pot on the stove to simmer on low heat for a few hours. Meanwhile, he processed some meat from 3 beavers he had recently caught. Due to the parasites typically found in beaver meat, it was not used for eating, but worked well as bait. Ground into mince, a little smeared on traps during the trapping season proved highly effective. As time passed, jars of beaver conserve kept appearing, preparing for the upcoming trapping season. By the time he finished the last jar, it was about time to check the pot. As he lifted the lid, a fragrant aroma filled the air. Looking inside, he saw a layer of fish oil floating on the surface, indicating a successful extraction. Ray scooped the liquid into a bottle and used a sieve to filter out impurities. Soon, he filled a bottle. Since water and fish oil have different densities, they separated quickly. Ray then used a spoon to transfer the top layer of fish oil into another container, obtaining brightly colored pure fish oil. His hard work today was very satisfying and not in vain. In Montana's Ruby Valley, with the arrival of spring, newborn calves started to be born, marking a vulnerable time for the herd. Today, Jack received a call from a rancher who had spotted a cougar near his property and needed Jack's urgent assistance. As Jack was nearing the ranch, he noticed cougar tracks in the snow beside the road. The prints seemed fresh, likely belonging to the cougar in question. However, since this was a main road with heavy traffic, he took precautions to prevent any accidents by releasing only one experienced hunting dog, Marin, to track the cougar's scent. Marin, the team's most reliable and a lead dog, would set the direction for the others to follow. Jack was concerned, though, as encountering a cougar alone could be dangerous for a hunting dog. After some thought, he released another dog to accompany Marin for mutual support. Urged on by Jack, the dogs energetically bounded up the hill. Soon, they began to run wildly, indicating they had locked onto the target. Jack hurriedly drove to support them, monitoring the GPS as he observed heavy traffic on the highway. This could pose a significant risk if the cougar crossed there. Fortunately, Jack's worries did not materialize. Marin headed towards the countryside. Jack then decided to release the rest of the hunting dogs to assist. Soon, he heard Marin's bark in the distance, signaling the others who rushed to join. Jack smiled in relief. Marin proved to be a capable leader. With a lighter heart, Jack followed slowly behind, finding some fur along the way and an animal carcass under a nearby tree. Two of the dogs were eating from it, which Jack stopped to keep them focused on the hunt. The carcass, a pronghorn, bore the hallmarks of a cougar's kill, explaining the cougar's frequent appearances since it hadn't finished its meal. After examining the site, Jack continued uphill and soon could hear the dogs barking. They had cornered the cougar. Quickening his pace, Jack arrived to see the cougar trembling in a tree, with the dogs eagerly circling below. He immediately calmed the dog that was trying to climb, urging it to ease its excitement. This was a very young female cougar whose hunting skills needed improvement, which is why she had wandered into the valley where prey was easier to catch. However, after today's encounter with the hunting dogs, she likely wouldn't dare come down from the mountains again. Terrified, she just wanted to go home to her mother. Taking advantage of the hunting dog's distraction, she suddenly leapt from the tree and escaped the encirclement. The dogs chased urgently behind her, with Jack running after them. After some time, Jack found the dog team again, and the cougar was once more treed. As dusk fell, Jack decided it was time to end the chase and called the dogs home. Despite the brief encounter, it left a lasting impression on the young lioness. Hunter Paul had a perfect season, earning nearly $20,000 over 3 months. After 6 years of planning, he finally gathered enough for a down payment and bought 10 acres of land in the mountains. With spring finally here and today being a sunny day, Paul was ready to officially move. Since building a new house would take months, he decided to move his old house to use as a temporary residence. For this, he borrowed a trailer and worked with his son, Geese. First, they secured the cabin firmly to the trailer. To prevent it from moving, they took protective measures. Once ready, they set off for their destination, 55 miles away. Though not far, the mountain roads were challenging. They became narrow and were lined with trees that could pose obstacles. Paul was very cautious, constantly watching the road ahead, while Geese provided support from behind. They moved slowly and rhythmically. Soon they encountered their first obstacle, a tree that had grown crooked and could scrape the cabin. Paul stopped the vehicle and started his chainsaw, cutting down the tree to clear the path. After clearing the road, they continued on their journey. As time passed, the mountain road became narrower and muddier, severely hindering their progress. To make matters worse, it suddenly started raining. Paul was in a sour mood and cautioned his son to be careful. After a while, they encountered a second obstacle, a rock slide that could potentially puncture their tires. Unwilling to take risks, Paul and his son cleared the debris before continuing. Geese kept an eye on the tires, and just as they seemed to be getting through safely, a large rock nearly touched the tire, as if about to kiss it. Paul inspected the situation and found it wasn't promising. If they proceeded blindly, they would likely hit the rock. He used a hammer to chip off the edges of the rock, then cautiously moved forward. This careful maneuvering eventually allowed them to pass safely. They continued on, and the rest of the journey went smoothly until they reached their destination. However, this did not mean Paul could relax, as the most challenging part was yet to come. They had to unload the cabin without any damage. Fortunately, a friend named Brendan, a longtime buddy of Paul's, came to help. They planned to first prepare the foundation. Brendan chopped down trees, and Geese used a bulldozer to level the ground. They worked energetically and quickly readied the site. Now it was time to unload the cabin. Paul slowly reversed, positioning the trailer correctly. They then unfastened the chains and reattached them to the bulldozer. With its help, they carefully lowered the cabin. This process had to be handled with utmost caution. Despite their efforts, there was a significant wobble, which frightened Gies into stopping immediately. Once the cabin stabilized, he continued. And this time, there were no more incidents. The cabin landed safely, and now it was just a matter of driving the trailer out. Paul started the vehicle and slowly pulled the trailer away. At this moment, he felt a tremendous sense of relief and belonging. This place would now serve as his homestead, and a new chapter in his life was beginning. He looked forward to it eagerly. In Idaho's Sawtooth Mountains, the Harry brothers had finally survived the cold winter. It was time to start work on the ranch. They planned to build a cellar at the edge of the ranch to store some farm products. Since purchasing their first herd of cattle 4 years ago, their business had been thriving. Now, they were reaping the rewards. This year, they bought 5 acres of land for vegetable cultivation. The cellar was already dug out, and the next step was to lay the foundation. The 2 men trimmed the edges of the logs and then used a cart to transport them into the cellar. These logs, sourced from their grandfather's sawmill, had many years of history and showed signs of weathering, but they were still quite heavy, requiring both men to push them together. Next, they secured the logs with 2 planks, placing a support post on each side. They then placed a thick log horizontally across the 2 posts and secured it with long screws. Using the same method, they continued to reinforce the structure. After some busy time, the framework gradually took shape. The next step was to install the wooden planks. The 2 men fixed the planks side by side, and through mechanical operations, 3 walls quietly formed. They then brought in more wood, placing it piece by piece on top of the frame to serve as the roof. Once the roofing was complete, they covered it with tarp to provide rain protection. Now that the cellar's foundation was established, the next step was to bury it. To better secure it, they used 2 large stones to prop up the frame before preparing to cover it with soil. This task required Harry to drive above the site, which involved some risk. He drove carefully, unable to see clearly below. But fortunately, Kid constantly observed and directed him from below. With their perfect coordination, the cellar was systematically buried. At one point, Kid asked Harry to stop so he could go inside to check the walls, which seemed to be inclining inward. It appeared that the walls could not withstand the pressure of the soil. They decided to reinforce the structure by cutting planks and fixing them diagonally against the walls for additional support. After completing the reinforcements, they continued and soon filled in the soil. The next step was to design a door. They enlarged the door frame and moved in a pre-made door, first cutting it to the right size and then adding hinges. Although the cellar's appearance was not very appealing, its functionality was fully intact. Now only a few finishing touches were needed. They used a horseshoe as a door lock, which, although unsightly, did not affect its functionality. Then, they designed several wooden shelves inside. With this, the construction of the cellar was finally complete, giving them a profound sense of satisfaction. Once the weather warmed up further, they would start planting vegetables. Old Tom was celebrating his 80th birthday, but he was still busy working. With the arrival of spring, the trading post was about to open. He and his partner Will were making final preparations, including creating a Native American-style teepee as this year's highlight product for the trading season. First, they tied 3 wooden poles together, pulled them up with ropes, and set up a tripod. Meanwhile, at home, Nancy had her own plans. She wanted to bake a cake for a birthday party that evening, a surprise Tom was unaware of. He simply thought he was having dinner with his brother's family, as was typical for his birthdays. But this year, being his 80th, Nancy felt it should be more special. Back to Tom and Will, they installed the last pole, completing the teepee's frame. They secured the frame further with ropes and then draped it with a canvas that was waterproof and insulated. Native Americans have used such teepees for thousands of years, as they are portable and ideal for crossing the Great Plains. The canvas, traditionally made from buffalo hide, required 12 to 14 hides. Nowadays, with buffalo numbers dwindling, such canvas is expensive and hard to find. Due to the canvas's weight, they first tied it to a pole. Then the 2 men leaned the pole against the frame and wrapped the canvas around it. A few miles away, at his brother Jack's homestead, A surprise for Tom was being prepared. Jack had a dried elk hide from a few weeks ago and planned to turn it into a fur coat. He sketched a design known as a war bonnet on paper, made a scale model with cardboard, and then traced it onto the elk hide. He made a paint from water, hide glue, and soil, which he ground into a fine powder from clay and minerals for a good pigment. After painting, it was Connie's turn to add the finishing touches. She sewed handmade decorations onto the coat, enhancing its aesthetic value. Meanwhile, Tom's teepee was completed. Inside, they lit a campfire and brewed a pot of coffee, a simple reward for their hard work. During their wait, Tom and Will started chatting. Will asked Tom how he planned to spend the rest of his day. Tom replied somewhat plainly that he was just going out for a simple dinner. As one ages, birthdays become less exciting, just like the coffee in his hand. Warm, but with a hint of bitterness, always tasting the same no matter how long you drink it. Birthdays felt the same after experiencing so many. The sentiment remained constant. Reflecting on his life, Tom felt a deep connection with the teepee, having spent many days in such tents. Sitting in the teepee today, he felt quite nostalgic. Meanwhile, at home, the kitchen alarm went off, signaling that the bread was done baking. Next, Nancy prepared to make delicious buttercream frosting. After mixing, she tasted it and found it quite good. She then spread a thick layer of butter on the bread. In a secluded corner of Montana, in the Gallatin Valley, only a few freedom-loving individuals settled. But today, they gathered together at the only tavern in town to celebrate Tom's birthday. Unaware of the plans, Tom was on his way there, and his friends and family eagerly anticipated his reaction. When he finally arrived, everyone held their breath as Tom opened the tavern door. Cheers erupted inside. Surprised and moved, Tom's eyes quickly filled with tears. It was a scene he hadn't expected, thinking it would be just another mundane birthday. He was touched that everyone remembered and had prepared such a surprise for him. Tom hugged each of his friends, thanking them for coming. When he saw the elk robe Jack had prepared, he was overjoyed, loving the gift immensely. It was an unforgettable 80th birthday. He thanked his friends again, and the candle-blowing moment brought the celebration to a peak. Tom would never forget this day. This was his happy life.